what happens if you don't protect your assets? And the reality of it is you can build $1 million bank and lose it all with one trip and fall from a renter. It's making sure that the safeguards are in place such that that doesn't happen. And so what we wanted to do is just kind of walk through a couple of examples. One is what it looks like from a family that is not protected compared to a family that is. And to kind of just step through this a little bit, we've got the Johnson family who, age 35, did everything right? Got the right business in place, contributing to their company's retirement account. And again, on that sole proprietorship journey, the issue with just having a self-directed 401k or just having your basic 401k with your employer is the question is, how is it structured? What's being invested in it? And how can it support you going forward? And they've got that rental property that's in place, whether it's personal or business-wise, doesn't matter, but it's 35 years of age. And I talk to a lot of clients who are in this space where they have the right pieces. It's just making sure that those pieces are working together or aligned or structured properly to be able to compensate for what you need. One of the growing blind spots as you age is, what does that succession plan look like? And are you structured correctly to make sure that the actions that you're taking won't all of a sudden falter if something were to happen? But in this case, you have no will, no trust, no power of attorney, and you continue to muddle along as though everything is going to be okay. You know the saying, I'll get to it at some point. Right now, I'm still building my legacy. Right now, I'm still focused on making sure my business is functioning properly, or I'm putting all of the return that I'm making from my business back into my business so that it can continue to grow. Sole proprietorship, no legal protection, have your basic 401k without any trust structure. You got your rental property. And again, you've been muddling along as though, hey, I will get to it when I get to it. Right now, I'm focused on building my business. And again, it only takes that one action, that one business lawsuit. What happens at that one juncture? They're coming after everything. That tenant that trips and falls on either the snow wasn't removed during the winter, they tripped and fall up the steps, whatever the issue might be, that one tenant can cost you your nest egg in a blink of an eye. And so it's understanding that, okay, the retirement funds are now depleted based off the results of whatever the lawsuit might be based off what the tenant has. And now you're spending the remaining years getting back to nominal, just trying to get yourself back in a position to where you can comfortably retire, that you can comfortably put yourself in a position to where you can at least stop working at some point. But your assets are insufficient. And as far as there being an ability for wealth transfer, because those assets were pillaged by whatever that lawsuit related issue might have been, whether it's creditors or renters or whatever the case might be, you find yourself in a position to where you're just trying to survive. And even with being, let's say you hit that age 75 or older, and even with having something at play, whether it's the primary residence that you're just trying to pass down, without the right structure in place, what happens? Well, God forbid, if something happens to you, we are headed to probate. We're headed to probate, and what most don't realize, probate is a public action, meaning when you go into probate, not only is it happening and everyone can see it, now there's an opportunity for creditors to then prey upon you for what you've been able to accumulate over time and what's being passed down to you. Family finances are frozen during that period. Once you head into probate, your family finances are frozen for a period of, I think it's 9 to 18 months in some cases. Heavy estate taxes, which causes a diminish in your inheritance. And also, in a lot of cases, to make it through probate in that process, those who are inheriting whatever those assets are forced to sell just to cover those expenses. And again, this is all because, again, you did the right thing in focusing on taking the actions to build the assets, but without the right structure in place, you're leaving it to chance. You're leaving it to the possibility and or the opportunity that something may occur. To that, we want to jump into the Robinson family. And again, same age, same I'll call it process as it relates to the assets being identified, but launch a business using an LLC structure, established a family bank using a secure compound interest account, even created a revocable trust such that the secure compound interest account that was created can even live in. And then as you age, you realize your structure needs to grow with you. Even though you started with an LLC, you started with a secure compound interest account, and you even started with a trust in place, as you get older, as your asset starts to grow, you realize that maybe that structure needs to look a little bit different. So we move into from that revocable living trust into a legacy trust. And so we dropped then that life insurance based product into the legacy trust, and we focused on education. We focused on making sure that those in our circle of trust, again, when we're talking about a family bank, I'm not just talking about you, your spouse, and your kids. It's that family trust of individuals, and we focus on making sure that, God forbid, if something were to happen, we are able to pass on that knowledge and that information. And as you age, as you get older, any occurrence that may come about, that same business lawsuit that may happen, what are they able to access? What are they able to pierce? How far are they able to go? And in truth, that rental property lawsuit would be settled through, in most cases, insurance. Again, oversimplified, but the point is, the point is having structure in place puts you in a position such that you're not impacted by issues like lawsuits or renters getting hurt or accidents or malpractice or equipment failing or malfunctioning. And as you get older, these vehicles that you put in place earlier using your cash flow start to produce and build passive income that allows you to then supplement as income for yourself in retirement, or you can use it to purchase other assets as well. And as children are born, the trust ends up opening up policies on the newborn children, and you're placing them also in a position such that when it's time for college or whatever those life events may be, you created the structure 25 years ago such that they are taken care of if something were to happen. And then, God forbid, something happens to you. Probate. Is probate an issue as it relates to a structure like this when you have the right trust in place? And the answer is no. Probate is avoided. So there's no court activity, no delays, no public exposure, because in most cases you also have the anonymity associated with it. And then tax-free distributions. When you are structured correctly, the idea is to make sure that any distributions coming from the assets that are liquidated are not placed in a position where there's some capital gains or any other tax implication related. So making sure that you're structured such that any distributions created by the passing of the grantors of these situations is done so in a tax-free fashion. And then therefore, with the education around what was done earlier and the receipt of the assets that's being distributed over time, you're putting your family in a position to keep this machine going, to allow it to be able to continue to function within itself. So if we were to just look at the two holistically, and I'll zoom in, but I just want to give you a good solid view. If we were to just compare the two, there's family with structure, family without. What does that look like? And going item by item. If a parent passes away unexpectedly, when you have the right structure in place, you're covered by whatever those trust instructions would be. Whereas as it relates to the Johnson family, we are talking about probate. We're talking about emergency court action to be able to access whatever the assets are or access whatever the dollars need to be able to pay for whatever the costs are that are generated, or even to be able to continue whatever the business might be. And then the probate process. With the trust structure or the proper structure in place, you're protected. Again, it's a private transition. It is not open to the public. You can't see what is or isn't happening. And just so, as I mentioned before, there's about a 6 to 18 month delay as it relates to going through that probate process. Assets being accessible immediately, meaning, God forbid something happens, how quickly can distributions from assets happen to be able to pay for whatever that impact might be? Well, depending on how your structure is created as it relates to the trust, those trust activities immediately take place, meaning they're timed. They could be based off a date, based off an activity, or based off whatever the instructions are. And because you're going into probate, what ends up happening to those assets in a family without structure as it relates to the Johnson family, those assets are then frozen. Again, you cannot access them until that probate process is over. Asset protection from creditors. And I think this is a piece that tends to get missed because the individual that passed, those creditors, you think it's just in relation to the creditors that were maybe coming after the individual who's no longer here. But because this probate process is public, what if you are the one receiving some of these assets being passed down and those creditors find out and they end up coming after you? So again, it's absolutely one of those predatory related actions that, again, if you're properly structured, the trust protects you against that. Whereas if there's no structure in place, you're absolutely vulnerable to lawsuits and claims like that. And then tax planning. In most cases, that structure allows clarity around what that estate tax process needs to be and what assets are impacted and what aren't. And then whereas with the lack of structure, all of your assets are exposed. And so they're exposed not only to what might be capital gains, but they're exposed to all aspects, all taxation from most cases. And then beneficiaries being clearly identified or clearly defined. From a trust perspective, you got the clear roles, who takes on what position, that God forbid if something were to happen to the grantor, like who steps into what position, and you have the succession planning for what happens beyond the initial, I'll call it level of change. So you have that succession planning on what your grandkids or your great grandkids or their kids, their role would be inside of a process like this. Whereas without that structure, this could be very unclear. And this is what causes the infighting. This is where brothers or family members end up fighting each other over what they thought or what they expected to receive out of this process. And then again, as we mentioned, that probate process is absolutely public. And so public record exposure is something that absolutely happens when that structure doesn't exist, but you're protected from it as it relates to, when you have the proper structure in place, as it relates to a trust or even an LLC for that factor, as far as what is or isn't impacted by public exposure. And then family conflict risk. When you identify the roles and responsibilities within the trust structure, it minimizes what that looks like. I'm not saying it eliminates it, but it absolutely places the family in a position to where at least it's minimized because it's been clearly defined as to who plays what role and how the assets are being distributed. Whereas, again, probate usually brings a high potential for dispute, a high potential for people to, one, not understand their roles, not understand how things are being liquidated and the role that each individual plays. And last but not least, the ability to transfer wealth smoothly. This structure allows for seamless transfer compared to delays and cost and also confusion. And as you stated very, very well, sweetheart, probate is very public, very expensive, and exhausting, whereas trust can be quiet, fast, and quite private. And so as it relates to probate, we've kind of hinted to it and we talked about it on its surface, but what is it? Well, as a death occurs, what ends up happening is the assets are frozen. This is a court process that can take anywhere from 6 to 18 months, and in some cases longer, depending on how much of a dispute there may or may not be. And then you have those predators that come. Matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, sweetheart, this is a $30 billion industry to identify or to chase. You think ambulance chasers are bad, to kind of focus on going after the families who are going through this process because it is so public. But even on that note, the idea then becomes, okay, I'm fine. Why? Because I've got a will, and that will take care of this issue. I don't have to worry about a trust. I don't have to worry about additional structure. Well, the truth around wills in general is that they don't protect. I think you had a pretty good analogy, and I'm sure I'm going to mess it up, but it was like you're leaving a note. A will is similar to leaving a note, whereas a trust or structure around what a trust looks like is more along the lines of the directions on how to actually get to the destination. So if you see the note, or if the note doesn't necessarily hold much weight, but the directions on where to go, how to get there, and what to do once you get there are the piece that that really matters. So with that being said, and I think we kind of highlighted a few of these. The purpose for wanting a trust or having that right structure in place is based off data. It's not what I think, it's what I know. And that is 70% of wealth is lost by generation 2, 90% by generation 3. So it's making sure this structure is in place so that doesn't happen. And as we discussed, probate takes somewhere between 9 and 18 months just to get through that process. And what ends up happening then is you end up losing 10% of your wealth due to this process, because you were asking kind of what does that cost? And again, if I remember correctly, this is a $30 billion industry, and that's billion with a B. And so that this $30 billion industry is there such to be able to prey on the individuals going through this process that lack or don't have the structure. And so when we compare a will to a trust, as it relates to public record, wills are absolutely public record, whereas a trust, you're protected. Can wills be contested? Meaning, just because you have a will in place, does it hold you or anyone else accountable to whatever those actions of the will are? No. A will can absolutely be contested, whereas very rarely, again, if it's incorrectly structured, possibly, but in most cases, a trust very rarely can be contested. And again, we talked about this earlier. With not having a trust in place can cause your assets to be frozen as you go through this process. So within a will, what happens to those assets, even though you have a will in place, that does not stop or prevent your assets from being frozen, whereas a trust, you're protected. And as far as how easy is it for your heirs? The ability to be able to transition to what the next stage of life needs to be, or how those assets are being distributed. With the will, again, it's a manual, it's there, it's available, but it doesn't necessarily hold the necessary weight possible for you to be able to take action because you're missing the key. And that trust is that key. And then scammer exposure, meaning the same way people are preying on individuals because this is public record, it causes the will that you thought was the right thing to do to be able to make sure your family is taken care of is in essence putting your family at risk, whereas the trust adds that additional added protection. And again, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we've talked a lot about trust, but what I want to get into next is what type of trust, because there's hundreds of them out there. So if you don't know what you're looking for, you can get yourself in trouble.